The message came in at 03:47 ship time, while Commander Nora Calloway was elbow-deep in a cold cup of coffee and a navigation dispute that had been dragging on for 6 days. She almost let it queue. Almost. The subject line carried the emergency encryption tag, the kind that bypassed every filter, every delay protocol, every sleeping officer between the signal and the commander's own screen, the kind that had only been used 4 times in the last decade. Nora had been present for 2 of those 4 occasions, and both had aged her in ways she could not explain to anyone who had not been standing where she was standing when they happened. She set down the coffee. The file was 19 seconds of footage, a brief text header, coordinates, a passenger manifest. She read the manifest first, because she was a careful woman who believed in having solid ground under her feet before she looked at anything that might take it away. The colony ship Meridian's Hope departed Earth Station 7, 14 months ago, bound for the Callisto Reach settlements. Standard civilian transport, crew of 41, passengers, 4,218. She cross-referenced the passenger registry out of habit, routine, the kind of thing her hands did while her brain was still organizing itself into the shape the next few minutes would require. 1,847 of the registered passengers were children under the age of 12. The ship had been intercepted by Veth Dominion forces in the Reach corridor 11 days ago. 11 days. The information had taken 11 days to reach her, crawling through relay stations and diplomatic channels and bureaucratic caution, and the whole time it had been sitting in those channels like a stone on the bottom of a river, patient and cold and waiting for someone to pick it up. She watched the footage. She watched it once. She did not watch it again. She sat very still for a moment that lasted somewhere between 3 seconds and the rest of her life. Something happened in her chest during that moment, something that was not quite grief, and not quite rage, and not quite anything that had a name in the language she had grown up speaking. It was quieter than both of those things. It was the sound a machine makes when it finishes calculating and arrives at an answer it was built to produce. The answer was not a feeling. It was a number. It was a direction. It was the absolute mathematical certainty of what came next. She pressed the comm button. Lieutenant Harrow. A pause. The sound of a man being pulled from sleep. Commander? Get me the full fleet on an encrypted channel. All ships. Now. It's... Commander, it's 0350. Now, Lieutenant. He acknowledged, and the line clicked. She was already pulling up the star maps when the confirmation came. Her hands moved without thought. 14 years of these charts had put the coordinates into her muscle memory, the way music gets into the fingers of someone who has played the same piece 10,000 times. And she found the Reach corridor, and the Veth border systems, and the distances between them, and she started running the numbers she had already begun running the moment she read the manifest. Her XO was a Chellan named Voss. He had been with her for 9 years. He had walked into burning corridors beside her, held defensive lines that had no business holding, made decisions with her at 2 in the morning, when the official options were gone and only the real ones remained. In 9 years she had seen his mandibles move through every expression they had. She had never seen them do what they were doing now as he came through her office door. He had clearly been awake. He was reading the same file. The number on her screen, 1,847, was on his too. Meridian's Hope, she said. It was not a question. Yes, he said. How long have you known? 40 minutes longer than you. His eyes moved to the manifest numbers, then back to her face. I wanted to verify everything before I brought it to you. Every relay station, every confirmation point. I needed to be certain. She nodded. And? Every relay station confirms it. The Veth Dominion has issued no statement, no demands, no prisoner communication, no offer of negotiation, no ransom request, no political declaration, nothing. She turned back to the star maps. Her finger found the Reach corridor without looking, found the Veth border, measured the distance. Commander, Voss said carefully. He had a way of saying her rank that put exactly the amount of weight into it that the situation required. Never more, never less. Right now it was the weight of a man who had known her for 9 years, and was watching something happen in her expression that he had never seen happen before. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about ship counts, she said. A pause. Ship counts. Transit times. Veth population centers. How long from the Reach corridor to their home system? If we push the drives past the standard operating threshold. The sound Voss made was not quite a word. It was the kind of sound that means I understood the individual words you said, and I need a moment to accept that they were in that order. The conclave will want negotiation, he said, finally. They will expect a formal response through official channels. The compact has procedures, Nora said. I know what the compact has, and I know what I have. She turned and looked at him. Get me Captain Leon Ward. Get me Captain Grace Patel. Get every senior officer aboard every ship in this fleet, on the encrypted channel. Voss was quiet for a longer moment than usual. Nora, he said. He only used her first name when it mattered enough to drop the rank. She could count the times on 2 hands. What is the order going to be? She told him the order. He held very still. All of them? He said. She had already turned back to the maps. All of them, she said. The channel came alive at 0407. 12 faces across 14 ships, pulled from sleep or late watches or whatever the hours before dawn were for each of them. Captain Ward's steady presence in the frame beside Captain Patel's stillness. Lieutenant Commander Hira Nath of the Covenant Star, Captain Owen Briggs of the Ardent, all of them reading the same document in the 60 seconds Nora had given them before she spoke. Nobody spoke before she did. That told her everything she needed to know about the kind of fleet she had. You've all seen the Meridian's Hope passenger registry, she said. You've all seen the footage. I am not going to describe it. I am not going to repeat it. You are officers with judgment, and you know what it means. Silence across the channel. We are going to the Veth Dominion, she said. We are not going to file a declaration of intent. We are not going to send a list of demands. We are not going to give them time to build a position. We are going to move. We are going to be fast, and we are going to be thorough. She paused. If anyone on this channel has a procedural objection, raise it now. I will hear it once, in full. Nobody raised it. She had not expected anyone to raise it. Set course, she said. Push the drives to the threshold. We leave in 20 minutes. She closed the channel and for one moment, just one, she let herself feel the weight of the list. All those lines, all those first words someone had taught them, all those Tuesday mornings that were mid-sentence when the Veth arrived. Then she put it away. She folded it into the place behind her ribs where she kept the things that needed carrying, and she turned back to the star maps, and she got to work. The coffee was cold. She drank it anyway. Outside the viewport, 14 ships began to turn. Ambassador Saylock of the Galactic Neutral Conclave had spent 31 years studying human beings. He had 4 published volumes on the subject. The most recent, a 600-page analysis of human diplomatic behavior patterns, had been cited in treaty negotiations across 11 star systems. He was considered, within the Conclave's academic circles, to be the foremost non-human authority on the human species. 3 planetary councils had consulted him personally before entering into agreements with the United Nations Space Command. He had been proud of that reputation. He was sitting in his private study on Conclave Station Verith at an hour that was neither late nor early, but simply the blurred, ambiguous stretch of time that serious work sometimes requires when the first fleet movement reports came through, and his very first thought was that the data must be wrong. His second thought, arriving approximately 4 seconds later, was that he had spent 31 years studying the wrong things. The reports were not wrong. He pulled them up on 3 screens simultaneously and read them in the methodical, unhurried way he read everything, with the disciplined attention of someone who had made a career out of not reacting before he understood. He had written an entire chapter about this quality in humans, their volatility, their tendency toward emotional overreaction, their historical difficulty separating personal grief from strategic decision-making. He had used it as a gentle criticism in his 3rd volume, not a species flaw, he had written, but a complicating factor in long-term diplomacy. Humans feel too quickly and too completely to always think with full clarity. He had been very confident about that chapter. The confidence, looking at the fleet movement data on his screens, had begun to feel like a different kind of mistake. The Unscourse fleet, 14 warships, which was not an unusual patrol complement for the Reach Corridor region, had changed course at 0411 ship time. They had not broadcast a course change. They had not filed a new route with any transit authority. They had not sent a signal or communique or declaration of any kind. They had simply turned, all 14 ships in near-perfect coordinated silence, and begun accelerating toward Veth space, at a speed that pushed their drive systems past what the Conclave's engineers considered the standard safety threshold. This was the part that made Saylock read the report 3 times. Not the destination, not the armament configuration, the speed. Humans did not push their ships past the threshold unless time was a critical factor, unless waiting had costs they had already calculated and decided were unacceptable. He called his assistant, a young Hethran named Mira, who had been with his office for 8 months and who was, as he had noted with increasing frequency, considerably more perceptive than most of his senior colleagues gave her credit for. "Mira," he said, "I need access to the Chellan history archives. The sealed pre-contact period documents." She was quiet for a moment. "Ambassador, those archives require a level 7 security clearance and a formal petitioning process that takes... I hold level 7 clearance. You hold level 4, sir." He pressed the bridge of his nose. "Then I need you to locate someone with level 7 clearance who can grant me temporary access. In the next 20 minutes, if possible." "May I ask what you're looking for?" "I have just read a fleet movement report that does not match any of my published models," he said, "and I am becoming aware that there may be a significant gap in my understanding of this species. I would like to address that gap before the situation develops further than it already has." He heard her stand from her desk. "I'll make the calls." He sat back and looked at the movement data again. 14 ships, all turning simultaneously. No broadcast, no declaration, no demand, no ultimatum, no formal communique, no announcement. Every human conflict he had studied, and he had studied 47 of them in careful detail, with access to primary sources where available, had a first act. Every single one, a declaration, or a demand, or at minimum a formal communication signaling intent. Even the most aggressive human military actions in the historical record had included some form of announcement. Humans announced. They spoke. They used language as architecture, a framework inside which the actual events would then be constructed. This had no framework. Just the movement. Just 14 ships turning at speed, and the particular silence of no words at all. He thought about the Meridian's Hope footage, which had been distributed across diplomatic channels 2 days ago. He had reviewed it in his capacity as a conclave observer, and had catalogued his response in the professional manner he had spent 3 decades developing. Shock, moral outrage, a clear violation of 7 articles of the Galactic Compact. He had begun drafting a formal censure document within the hour. He had assumed the humans would pursue formal channels, diplomatic pressure, a demand for an emergency compact session, economic leverage, perhaps some form of sanctions package. He had assumed the humans would do what humans had always done. He stared at the fleet data. No words, just movement. 14 ships, past safe speed, toward Veth space. The level 7 access arrived in 18 minutes. Mira had found a retired conclave justice who, upon being told the reason for the request, had granted it without any of the usual discussion of procedure, and had added, in the quiet way of a very old person who has learned when brevity is kinder than elaboration, that Saylock might want to sit down before he started reading. He had found that odd advice. He found it considerably less odd 30 pages in. The Chellan had made first contact with humanity 287 years ago. The sealed pre-contact archives were the records of what they had observed about human civilization in the decades before they announced their presence. The documents were sealed because the Conclave, at the time of humanity's formal induction to the galactic community, had made the administrative judgment that releasing them publicly might create diplomatic complications. Saylock read the first 30 pages and understood precisely what those complications would have been. The Chellan had watched humans for 60 years before first contact. 60 years of careful, scientific observation. They had watched human wars. They had watched human recoveries. They had documented the patterns repeating across generations and geographies and centuries, and they had written meticulous notes. The notes were the most unsettling academic documents Saylock had encountered in 31 years. Not because of the violence. Every species had violence in its developmental history. The Chellan, the Veth, the Mal, the Hethran. All of them had passed through periods of serious conflict. Violence was not the thing that had led the Conclave to seal these documents. It was the particular configuration of what the violence was for. Territory conflicts were common across species. Resource conflicts were common. Conflicts over ideology, governance, pride, trade advantage, all deeply common, all mapped to existing models. But the Chellan had observed something else. A category of human conflict that did not map to any model they had encountered in prior contact situations. They had struggled to find the right word in their own language. The closest translation was a compound concept that roughly meant the war that has no exit condition that the losing side can offer. When humans went to conflict over things that could not be made right, when the trigger was something that could not be returned, could not be replaced, could not be compensated for in any currency that existed, something changed in the fundamental nature of the conflict. The usual analytical tools did not apply. The normal pressure points did not function. Negotiation, which operates on the premise that both parties have something they want and something to lose, simply did not produce the expected results. Because, in these specific cases, the humans had already calculated what they were willing to lose. Everything was the calculation. Everything was acceptable, in exchange for what they were moving toward. Saylock read the phrase that a Chellan field observer had recorded from an intercepted human signal during one of the oldest documented cases in the archive. He read it twice. He set it down. He looked at the fleet data on his other screen. 14 ships. Past safe speed. No words. He called Mira. I need you to draft an immediate advisory to every Conclave member system within receiver range of Veth territory, he said. Not a standard communique, an advisory. The highest language category we have. Her voice was measured. Ambassador. The highest category is reserved for imminent large scale. I know what it's reserved for. He looked at the manifest data someone had forwarded to his secondary screen. The number at the bottom of the list. Draft it. Send it within the hour. A pause. What should the advisory say? He thought about the Chellan historian's phrase, about the 60 years of observation, and what they had found at the bottom of it, about 31 years of his own study, and the specific gap in all 4 of his volumes that he was only now tracing the edges of. Tell them, he said, that the situation involving the Veth Dominion has moved outside the standard category of diplomatic dispute. Tell them that any system with active political or military ties to the Veth Dominion should evaluate those ties immediately and thoroughly. A pause. And tell them, he said, very quietly, not to be in the path of what's moving. He closed the call and returned to the archive. He had 4 published volumes on the human species, the most recent one cited in 11 systems. He read until the Chellan historian's calm, careful phrases began doing something to his understanding that felt less like learning and more like a long, slow revision of everything he had believed he knew. They do not stop, the historian had written. Not, they fight effectively. Not, they retaliate proportionally. Not, they are formidable opponents when pushed beyond a particular threshold. Just, they do not stop. He read, until the fleet movement data on his third screen showed the ships crossing the first navigation marker toward Veth space, and he kept reading after that. His assistant Mira knocked and entered without waiting. She was carrying a data tablet and her expression was the one she wore when the information was important, and she was measuring how to give it. The Kreth are silent, she said. How silent? No transmissions in 42 hours. No ship movement on any tracked route. Complete communications blackout. The Kreth had raided human shipping lanes without pause for 40 years. They had been the loudest species in this sector in terms of signal traffic. Constant, confident broadcasts that Saylock had always suspected functioned as territorial markers as much as communication. 40 years of noise. 42 hours of nothing. And the Hethran border systems? He asked. She showed him the data. 3 frontier stations had filed voluntary revised territorial boundary requests. The proposed new boundaries pulled Hethran claimed space significantly back from any area that could be interpreted as overlapping with Unsk-adjacent territory. Voluntary, she said, before he could ask. No prompting from any human authority. The requests were filed under standard conclave boundary adjustment protocols, which require the filing party to pay a considerable administrative fee. They paid without negotiating the fee.
He processed this.
And the Mal? She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The fraction that in 8 months of working with him she had learned meant the information is more significant than the others. The Mal Confederation is releasing 3 prisoners, she said. He looked up. The humans from the border dispute? He said. Yes. They have held those prisoners for 11 years. Yes. They refused every Unsk request for exchange. There were 7 formal petitions. They declined every one. Yes, she said. They are releasing all 3. To the nearest human outpost. The release comes with a message. She paused. 4 words. He waited. She told him the 4 words. He sat with those 4 words for a long time. 4 words, and 11 years of position. Abandoned. 3 people. Released. No conditions. No exchange. No face-saving frame around it. He thought about the Chelan historian's observation. About the fleet moving at past safe speed with no words. About the particular arithmetic that was visibly rearranging the behavior of every species in this sector of space, without a single demand being made. They do not stop, the historian had written, and the galaxy was learning what that meant, not from a declaration, but from a direction on a star map, and it was learning it fast. File it, he said, and keep watching the border systems, all of them. He turned back to his screens. He had a 5th volume to write. He had known it since page 30 of the archive. He opened a blank document. He sat for a while looking at the blank space, thinking about what he had believed, and what the fleet movement data was teaching him, and the specific distance between those 2 things. He began to write. Captain Grace Patel had not slept since the channel closed. She stood in the forward observation bay of the Unsk ship steadfast, as the Reach corridor slid behind them, and the dark between systems opened ahead, and she thought about the manifest with the focused, complete attention of someone who had decided not to think about anything else until she was done. She was a methodical woman, had been a methodical girl, the kind who kept everything in order, her books in precise rows, her responsibilities categorized and filed, her emotions handled in the careful way of someone who has learned that the feelings are real, but the functioning has to continue alongside them. Her first commanding officer had called it a gift. She had never been entirely comfortable with that framing. It was not a gift. It was a choice she made every morning, the choice to keep going, and some mornings the choice was easier than others. This morning it was the hardest she could remember. She had read the manifest completely, every line. She had made a deliberate point of not skimming, because she believed that the particular respect a list like that deserved was the time it took to read each line. 1,847 names, ages beside them. The ages were what required the most deliberate management. The ages were where her filing system, the careful internal architecture she had built over years of command, met something it had not been built for. She was past it now. She was functioning. That was the sentence she kept returning to, the one that meant what it said, and also meant something larger and harder that she did not examine too directly. Her communications officer, a young man named Eli Grant who had 2 years of service on this ship, and who she trusted with the same absolute certainty she trusted the equipment he operated, appeared at the entrance to the observation bay. Commander Calloway's updated orders have been distributed to all ships, he said. We are 6 hours from the corridor exit, 11 hours from the Veth border. Acknowledged. He did not leave. She waited. Sir, he said. Eli. I read the manifest. I know. All of it. The whole thing. I know. She turned from the viewport and looked at him directly. He was 26 years old. She knew his age the way she knew the age of everyone on her ship, not because she was required to, but because she had decided, early in her command, that knowing who was aboard was part of the responsibility of having them aboard. He was 26 and his face was doing the thing that faces do when they are carrying something too large for them, and trying to carry it anyway. Well, the feelings you're having are the correct response to what you read, she said. They don't make you unable to do your job. Is that what you're doing? He said. Having the correct response and doing the job anyway? Yes. He looked at her for a moment. Does it get easier? The doing the job part? When the thing you're doing it around is this big? She thought about her honest answer. She thought about the filing system that had cracked around name 400, and the weight she had put back in her chest, that she would carry until she was done, and after she was done. No, she said, but you get better at not stopping. He absorbed this the way young officers absorb things that are true but difficult, with the particular stillness of someone integrating new information into existing understanding. Okay, he said. Go check the communication arrays. Yes, sir. He left. She turned back to the viewport. 11 hours. Aboard the fleet command vessel, Nora Calloway had not sat down in 5 hours. Voss had stopped suggesting it after the second attempt. He had settled instead into the steady presence that she valued more than most things, close enough to act if needed, far enough to give her the space the work required. He had learned, in 9 years, that there was a precise and meaningful difference between the two. She was working the star maps and the intelligence files simultaneously, building a picture of the Veth Dominion that covered every aspect she would need: defensive configurations, population distributions, transit routes, command structures, response time projections from each border system. She was doing the work with the focus she always brought to work that mattered: complete, unhurried attention applied at speed, and the focus had a quality tonight that was different from other nights. Not sharper exactly, quieter. The way a very large, very precise machine is quiet when it is running exactly the way it was built to run. At hour 5 she paused. Not because she was done, because something in the intelligence files caught her attention in a way that made her stop and read it a second time, and then sit back and look at the ceiling for a moment. The Veth Dominion Threat Assessment documents. Intercepted, partially decoded, 4 years old. The section that covered humanity's listing in the Veth threat matrix. The category designation the Veth had assigned the human species translated, approximately, to substantial but predictable. There were notes. Extensive, careful, thorough notes. The Veth Intelligence Service had done real work. They had studied human conflict patterns, human diplomatic behavior, human military response cycles, human negotiation tendencies. The work was detailed and clearly had required significant resources. It was not the analysis of a species that had been lazy or careless. It was the analysis of a species that had gotten the category wrong. Because they had studied the right things. They had studied every human conflict in the accessible record and drawn conclusions from those conflicts about human behavior. Their conclusions were not inaccurate about the conflicts they had studied. They had simply not studied the right conflicts. The conflicts they had studied were the ordinary ones, the territory conflicts, and the resource conflicts, and the political conflicts, and the pride conflicts. The ones that had always, eventually, involved a table. The ones where an offer, made with enough sincerity and enough material weight, had the structural possibility of changing the outcome. They had not studied the other kind, the kind that had no exit the losing side could offer. Because the historical record of those conflicts was not catalogued with standard military labels. It was filed under different headings, in different archives, in documents that required a different kind of careful reading to understand what they actually described. The Veth had not done that reading. Nora closed the file. Voss. Yes. They studied us. The Veth. Real work. Good intelligence. They built a detailed threat matrix. Yes. It didn't have the right category in it. Voss was quiet for a long moment. No, he said. I imagine it did not. She nodded once. She went back to the star maps. 6 hours. The Veth border station sent a signal at hour 9. Addressed to the UNSCO fleet. Careful language, clearly translated with attention to tone. It expressed concern about the fleet's current heading and velocity. It requested clarification of intent. It offered to establish a direct diplomatic channel with Veth Dominion representatives who were, it noted, prepared to discuss any outstanding matters. Nora read it. No response, she said. Dana Cole, her communications officer, looked up from her station. No response at all, Commander? They know our course, Nora said. They know our speed. They know we have been moving for 9 hours, with no broadcast. The course and speed and silence together are a complete message. There is nothing to add to it. The border station went silent at hour 10. At hour 11, the fleet crossed the Veth boundary. No alarms. No scrambled intercept ships. The border station that should have launched a defensive response had its docking bay doors standing open, and its running lights on, but nothing came out of it. Nora watched the long-range scan with the particular attention she gave to things that were not behaving as expected. They were leaving. The station personnel were evacuating. Small ships, personal transports, emergency vessels, whatever the station had available, moving away from the station in every direction that was not the direction of the approaching fleet. She watched for 60 seconds. They know, Voss said, very quietly. Yes, she said. How? She thought about the 17-second footage, about the manifest, about the particular calculation that becomes possible for a species that has been carrying a specific weight for a specific length of time and has been very quiet about it. Because they studied us, she said. They did the work. They know what we do. A pause. They just never believed the category that would make us do this was something they were capable of triggering. She watched the border station grow small on the long-range scan as the fleet slid past it. They believe it now, she said. 2 hours inside Veth territory, the high command broadcast came. addressed on all frequencies. The conclave could hear it. The Chelon could hear it. Every species with a receiver in range could hear it. The broadcast said, in language clearly assembled by someone working very hard to find the right tone, "We request immediate communication. We are prepared to open direct negotiation on all outstanding matters. We wish to speak directly with UNS command." The broadcast repeated 3 times. Nora listened to all 3. She looked at the manifest on the corner of her screen. "No response," she said. And the fleet kept moving. Voss did not sleep. He stood watch through the long hours of movement into Veth space, and he thought about humans with the particular quality of thought that comes from 9 years of proximity to something you have learned well and are learning all over again at the same time. He had grown up believing, as most Chelon of his generation did, that the human species was a young civilization, working through the normal stages that all young civilizations worked through. Energetic, occasionally volatile, better at some things than most species would give them credit for, and worse at others. Interesting neighbors, once you got past the initial difficulty of the contact period. He had believed this with genuine confidence for the first several years of his service alongside them. The confidence had been quietly eroding for some time. Not replaced by doubt, exactly. Replaced by something more specific. The growing awareness that the picture he held of humanity was accurate as far as it went, and did not go quite far enough. Tonight, it had stopped going far enough at all. He watched Nora work the war table. He watched her move through 14 hours of coordination and calculation and decision with the same expression she wore when she was doing serious work. Focused, economical, present, no movement wasted. He had seen her in difficult situations before. He had seen her in situations where the difficulty was large enough to change most people's face, and her face had not changed, and he had admired that, had filed it under the human characteristic he thought of as operational steadiness. He understood now that he had been looking at the wrong thing. It was not steadiness. It was direction. There was a difference. Steadiness was the quality of someone who was managing difficulty by maintaining their form. What he was watching was something else. The quality of someone who had identified where they were going with such complete certainty that everything between here and there was simply detail. The difficulty was not being managed. It was being moved through, in a straight line, without deviation. He thought about something she had said to him once, early in their service together. He had been trying to understand a particular human expression he had encountered, one that did not have a clean Chelon equivalent. She had been half distracted, sorting through a communications backlog, and she had explained it with the simplicity that she gave to things she considered settled. She had said, "There are people who protect others because it is their role. And then there are people who protect others because somewhere along the way the protecting became the most essential thing about them, more essential than safety, more essential than self-preservation, more essential than almost anything the galaxy usually treats as a reasonable limit." She had not been talking about herself. She had been explaining the phrase, but he had looked at her while she said it, and he had had the first very quiet, very early version of the thought he was completing now. Captain Ward appeared beside him at the navigation console. Ward was a large, quiet man, who had the particular quality of being easy to miss in a crowd, until the moment he chose to be present, at which point you wondered how you had been missing him. He had commanded the Dawnfield for 6 years, and he was, in Voss's assessment, one of the best officers in the fleet, for reasons that were difficult to list, because they were all the same reason. "How is she?" Ward asked. "Working," Voss said. "I know she's working. How is she?" Voss thought about the question with the care it deserved. "She is. Where she is going," he said. "She got there the moment she read the manifest. Everything since has been the motion." Ward absorbed this. "When it's done," he said, "she's going to need the people around her to stay close." "I know," Voss said. "Not to say anything. Just to be there." "I know." Ward nodded once, the compact nod of a man who does not waste gesture, and returned to his station. Voss turned back to watch Nora. She was looking at the manifest again, the number in the corner of the secondary screen. She looked at it the way someone looks at something they are holding in trust, with a specific, deliberate, sustained attention that was not grief, and was not anger, and was not anything with a simple name, but was the thing that made the fleet move, at past safe speed, with no words, and no first act, and no room for any offer to land. He stayed close. That was all. He stayed close. The Veth defense fleet appeared on the long-range scans at hour 14, positioned at the boundary of the home system. A significant force. Larger than the intelligence estimates had suggested. Nora looked at the scan for perhaps 4 seconds. "Leon," she said on the direct channel. "I see it," Ward said. "Grace." "Already adjusting angle," Patel said. She did not need to say more. This was what 14 years of working with excellent people looked like in practice. You gave them the information and the trust, and then you got out of the way and let them be excellent. The engagement lasted 22 minutes. Not a long time, in the scope of things. It was, Voss would think later, the most efficient 22 minutes he had ever witnessed. Not efficient in the cold way that word sometimes implies. Efficient in the way that something built correctly for its purpose is efficient. No wasted movement, no deviation, everything going exactly where it needed to go. At the conclusion of the 22 minutes, the Veth home system was open. Nora received a communication report from Dana Cole. 46 separate Veth transmissions had been logged in the past hour. Increasingly urgent, increasingly specific about what was being offered. An accounting, they said, a tribunal, records, acknowledgement, whatever the humans needed. Nora listened to the summary. She touched her pocket. The manifest was there. "Continue," she said. And they continued. Saylock's advisory reached the Mall Confederation 14 hours after he sent it, and the response came back in 11 minutes, which was the fastest turnaround on a conclave communication he had received in 31 years of work. The response was 2 sentences. The first sentence said, "We have read your advisory." The second sentence said, "We already knew." He held that for a while. Then he went back to writing. The 5th volume was not like the other 4. The other 4 had the measured cadence of work done from a comfortable distance, the work of a scholar who has time and access, and the luxury of comprehensive review, before forming conclusions. This one was written in the middle of the thing it was describing, which gave it a different quality. Faster, more certain in some ways, more humble in others, and in places something that a careful reader might identify as the particular quality of a person who has been wrong about something significant, and is choosing to say so plainly. He wrote a section about the door. He had arrived at the metaphor somewhere around hour 12, of watching the fleet move, and the border systems respond, and the galaxy quietly, rapidly, without announcement, rearrange itself around the new information it was processing. The door was the best he could do. There was, he wrote, something in the human species that functioned like a door. In ordinary circumstances, in the vast majority of circumstances, across the vast majority of human history and human interaction, it was closed. The human species that the galaxy had dealt with, negotiated with, traded with, disagreed with, and eventually resolved disagreements with, that was the version on this side of the door. And that version was real. He wanted to be clear about this. It was not a performance. It was not strategic. The patience was genuine. The cooperation was genuine. The general good-natured effort at making the complicated business of being neighbors in a large galaxy work as well as it could, all genuine. But it was, he had come to understand, a version that existed because of a choice. The choice was made every day, by an enormous number of individuals, to be this version rather than the other one. The other one lived behind the door. The door did not lock from the outside. No external pressure, no diplomatic leverage, no calculated move by any other species could open or close it. Only one thing opened it, and that thing was not a political calculation, or a resource dispute, or an ideological disagreement, or any of the other categories of conflict that the galaxy had learned to navigate with humans. That thing was harm directed at the people who were, in the human moral architecture, the most protected. Their children. When that door opened, he wrote, the version of humanity on this side of it was no longer the version you were dealing with. He stopped writing for a moment. He looked at the manifests again. He had been looking at them repeatedly, not because the information was changing, but because he felt, with increasing conviction, that the full weight of what they meant demanded that kind of sustained attention. 1,847 names, ages beside them, ages that should have grown to become much larger ages, should have been added to by years of experience and learning, and the ordinary accumulation of a life. Should have. He wrote, we observed the choice, and we thought it was the whole picture. We thought, this is what humans are. We built our models on it. We made our calculations on it. And the models were not wrong, but they were not complete. We were studying the choice without understanding what it was being chosen instead of. He wrote, I do not think this is something that will happen again. Not because of what was done, because of what every species in this sector now understands, clearly and permanently and without any room for doubt, about what the choosing looks like when it stops. He wrote, I have spent 31 years writing about human patience. I should have spent at least part of that time writing about what the patience costs. He set down his writing tool and listened to the silence of Conclave Station Verith, which was not actually silent, but had the quality of silence that comes from a lot of people processing information privately and simultaneously. His screen showed the Veth home system. He watched it for a while. Then he went back to writing. He wrote through his assistant bringing coffee he did not drink. He wrote through the sequence of broadcast updates from the Veth High Command, each one more desperate than the last, the offers expanding in ways that would have been extraordinary in any other context. A full accounting, full records, international tribunal, whatever form of acknowledgement was required. He wrote through the Unska fleet's non-responses. He wrote through the update from the Kreth, which came not as a diplomatic communication, but as a private message through an unofficial channel to a conclave contact, and which said, in language that had clearly been worked over many times before being sent, we have reviewed our position on all outstanding matters with humanity. We would like to arrange a conversation about revisions. 40 years of raiding human shipping lanes. 40 years. One conversation request, sent through back channels, private, without announcement. He wrote that down. He wrote a chapter called, What It Took. Not what the humans did. What it took for the galaxy to understand what was already true. What had always been true. The thing the Chellan had known, in their sealed archive, for nearly 3 centuries, and which had still managed to surprise everyone, including the people who should have known it best. He thought about a Chellan field observer writing in a document that would be sealed for 287 years. They do not stop. Not a warning, not an analysis, just a description, written by someone watching events unfold, trying to put the precise truth into the smallest number of words. They do not stop. He had read it twice and put it down. He had thought it was an exaggeration. He knew now it was the most accurate thing in the archive. The fleet movement data showed the Unski ships holding position at the Veth home system boundary. The engagement was complete. The Veth Dominion, as a functioning political entity, no longer existed. The Veth High Command had gone silent. Not the strategic silence of a force preparing a response, the different silence of something that is finished. Saylock saved his document. He looked at the section he had been writing, and read it back, and changed 3 words, and then left it. He looked at the blank page after the last section. He sat for a while. Then he wrote the last line of the chapter. He wrote, They hoped they would never have to open the door. They kept it ready anyway. That is the thing we missed. Not the door. The hoping. The Veth Dominion ceased to exist as a political entity on a Wednesday. The formal record of it, the Unskare Observer reports, the Conclave Observer reports, the diplomatic notifications sent to every relevant governing body in the sector, noted the date and the specific outcome with the precise, neutral language that official records use for things too large for any other register. Nora Calloway read her copy of the summary the same way she had read everything in the past 3 weeks, completely, without skimming, with the full attention she believed everything deserved, including documents she had anticipated and been waiting for. She set it down. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. She did not feel what she had wanted to feel. She was not certain she had known what she wanted to feel. The mission had a clear shape, a beginning and a middle and an end. And she had known the shape of it from the moment she pressed the comm button at 0347 and said, Get me the full fleet. She had moved through that shape with complete attention and complete commitment and the absolute absence of hesitation, because hesitation would have been its own kind of choice, and she had already made hers. The shape was complete now. The feeling that followed was not. She was standing at the viewport in her quarters when Captain Ward knocked and came in. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one. She took it. It was hot, which meant he had asked the galley specifically, because he knew she would have been awake long enough that she needed something hot, and probably had not thought to get it herself. This was who Leon Ward was. She had known him for 11 years, and this was the small, reliable, specific way he showed up for the people around him. She drank the coffee. It's done, he said. Yes. How are you? She thought about the honest answer. She thought about it carefully. the way she thought about honest answers that mattered, which was to locate them precisely before speaking them. "I feel like it's done," she said, "and I feel like it needed doing. And I feel like those are two separate things that are both completely true and don't add up to feeling good about any of it." He was quiet. "Do you feel good about it?" she asked. "No," he said. "I feel like I would do it again." She nodded. Yes. That was the honest answer for both of them. It contained contradictions that were not actually contradictions. It needed doing. She would do it again. She did not feel good. All of those things lived in the same space without canceling each other. She touched her pocket. The list was there. The manifest. 1,847 names. It had been there for 3 weeks, and the weight of it had not changed 1 gram since the moment it came into her possession. She had understood before she moved the fleet that this would be true. That the list does not get lighter when the conflict ends. That carrying it was a permanent condition, not a temporary one. That you carry it before, and you carry it during, and you carry it after, and the after is the longest part. She had accepted this. Ward finished his coffee. "Voss is outside," he said. "I know. He's been outside for about 2 hours. I know." He didn't say anything else. He set down his cup and touched her shoulder once, briefly, and left. She opened the door. Voss was standing in the corridor exactly where she had known he would be. He did not say anything when she appeared. He had known her for 9 years, and he knew that the right thing right now was not words. He just stood there. She stood there too, for a minute. "Come in," she said. They sat on opposite sides of the small table in her quarters, and Voss looked at her in the way he had developed over 9 years of learning to look at her. The way that gave her full attention and full privacy at the same time. The way that meant, "I am here, and I am not going to require anything from you." After a while, she said, "The Mall released their prisoners." "I heard," he said. 11 years. No conditions." "Yes. The Kreth have requested a diplomatic conversation." "I know." 40 years of raiding our shipping." "Yes." She looked at her hands. "It got through," she said. "The thing we were trying to say. Without words. Just the fleet and the speed and the direction. It got through to everyone." He was quiet. "Is that good?" he asked, carefully, not asking about the mission. About the message. About the thing that was now permanently changed in the political landscape of this sector. She thought about it for a real amount of time. "I think," she said slowly, "that it means certain things are less likely to happen. I think it means some version of this calculation was being made in a lot of places, and the outcome of the calculation has changed." She paused. "I think the understanding costs everyone something. Them and us. There are things you can't unknow once you know them." She looked at her pocket. "But the children on the next ship," she said. "The one that leaves next month, and the one after that, and all the ships that move through this corridor for the next 100 years. They get to be on those ships without knowing what this cost. They get to live in the space that was made." She stopped. "That's not nothing," she said. "No," Voss said. "That is not nothing." They were quiet together for a while. The sound of the ship around them was the steady, particular sound of a large vessel maintaining itself. Engines at cruise, air recyclers, the distant hum of systems that never fully slept. She had been listening to that sound for 14 years, and it had become one of the most reliable sounds she knew. The sound of function, the sound of continuity. "Voss," she said. "Yes. Thank you. For the 9 years." His mandibles moved. The particular movement she recognized now as the thing that was too large for words, but too important to leave unacknowledged. "The 9 years," he said, "were not difficult." She looked at him. "You made them not difficult," he said. "That is not a small thing to say." She nodded. Outside the viewport, the stars were exactly what they always were. Enormous. Patient. At a scale that made everything else proportional to something larger than any single moment or decision. She had always found that quality useful. Not comforting, exactly. Clarifying. She found it clarifying now. She thought about Saylock, wherever he was, writing his 5th volume. She thought about the Chellan archive that she had never read, but Voss had described to her once, years ago, in the brief way he described important things. The 30 pages that changed the observer's understanding. She thought about all the species watching, and learning, and adjusting their calculations, and she thought about what they were learning, and what it cost to be the thing being learned from. She thought about the door. She had not named it that, but she had understood it, in the way you understand things that have always been true about yourself, when a set of circumstances finally makes the understanding specific. There was something in her that was not the ordinary version of herself. It lived very quietly most of the time. It did not announce itself. It waited. It had been ready. It was still ready. That would always be true. She would carry the list and she would carry the readiness, and she would also carry, every day, in the ordinary work of the fleet and the patrol routes, and the civilian ships, and the new manifests of living people moving through space, the choice that was the other side of it. The choice to be the patient version, the cooperative version, the version that showed up at tables and worked through problems, and believed, most days, that the galaxy was navigable. Both were true about her. Both were true about her species. She had accepted this. She had accepted it the way you accept things that are simply what you are, without the need to make them simpler or more comfortable or easier to explain to someone who had not stood where she was standing when the footage played and the manifest number resolved on the screen. She touched her pocket one more time. Then she took her hand out and left it at her side. "I'm going to check the new patrol assignments," she said. "The route plan for the next quarter came in this morning." Voss stood. "I'll come," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." They walked down the corridor together. The lights were steady. The air recyclers hummed. Someone's coffee was burning somewhere in the direction of the officers' lounge, and the smell of it reached all the way to the corridor, honest and immediate, and the most ordinary smell in the universe. She thought about the children on the next ship. She thought about their Tuesday mornings, which would happen. Which would happen. She walked toward the nav room, and the fleet adjusted around her. 14 ships moving at safe speed now through the dark between the stars, and the dark was the same dark it had always been and always would be, and the ships moved through it the way ships were built to move through it, purposeful and bright, carrying everything that mattered. Saylock sent the 5th volume to his publisher on the 43rd day after the fleet returned. The note he attached was shorter than any note he had ever sent with a manuscript before. It said, "This one is different. I am not certain it belongs in the same category as the others. It may be a correction rather than a volume. Please read it that way." His publisher read it in 3 days, which was faster than she had read any of his other work, and she called him. "It's shorter than the others," she said. "Yes. The tone is different. I know." A pause on the line, the kind that means something is being selected from among several possible things to say. "It's better," she said. He had not expected that. The Galactic Neutral Conclave held its first formal session on the events in Veth territory, on the 51st day. The session lasted 11 hours, and covered more ground than any session Saylock could recall attending. Legal analysis, diplomatic precedent, humanitarian dimensions, long-range implications for compact jurisdiction, the specific question of how the galactic community intended to process what had happened, and what framework, if any, was adequate to contain it. Saylock spoke once, near the end of the 8th hour. He said, "I have spent 31 years studying this species, and I have 4 published volumes in which I describe them with what I believe to be accuracy. I want to say for the record that those volumes are not wrong about the things they address. The information they contain is accurate to the situations they describe." He paused for a long moment. "They are incomplete," he said. "They describe a version of humanity that is real, and they do not describe a version of humanity that is also real, and it is the undescribed version that this council is going to need to understand going forward. Not as a threat to be managed, not as a capability to be catalogued, as a fact about what this species is, held alongside the fact of what this species chooses, most of the time, to be instead." The session chair said, "Can you characterize those 2 things for the record?" He thought about the Chellan archive, about the fleet at past safe speed, about the Maul and their 4 words and the Kreth and their 40-year silence broken by a back-channel message, about Nora Calloway's fleet moving through the dark with no announcement and no first act and no room for any offer to land in time. He said, "The first version, the one we are accustomed to, the one we have built our diplomatic relationships on, is a species that believes in the long, patient work of building something livable among very different kinds of people. That version is not a performance. It is genuine. It is the result of a real choice, made every day, by an enormous number of individuals." He said, "The second version is what the first version was chosen instead of." He said, "The condition that produces the second version is specific. Harm of a category that cannot be undone. Harm directed at the people who are, in the human moral understanding, protected by something that is not negotiable and has no ceiling. He looked around the room. He said, I believe the Veth made a calculation, a considered one. They had studied humanity, and they had built their assessment of what humanity would and would not do. Their assessment was not careless. It was simply missing a category, the category of harm that does not have a response on the scale of ordinary conflict. He said, I do not believe anyone will make that calculation again. Not because of fear exactly, because the understanding is now complete in a way it was not before. Every species in this sector knows something now that was known in theory and is now known in fact, and the knowing changes what is thinkable. He sat down. The session continued. That night, alone in his study, with the 5th volume's final proofs on his desk, Saylock wrote a short coda that he had not included in the original manuscript, and that he added now because it seemed, in the particular clarity of the 51st evening, like the necessary last thing. He wrote, I spent 30 years documenting human patience. I should have spent at least some of that time asking what the patients cost, because that question leads to a different understanding than the one I arrived at, not more frightening, but more complete. He wrote, the humans I know are patient people, cooperative people, people who show up to very difficult conversations and stay in them even when staying is not easy, because they have decided that the work of making the galaxy navigable is worth doing. He wrote, they are also people who remember, somewhere beneath all of that, what the patience is made of, what it was built from, what it is chosen instead of, every morning, by a very large number of people who contain both things simultaneously, and have decided, for very good reasons, which one to lead with. He wrote, I think they hope every day that the decision is permanent. He wrote, I think they know it isn't. He wrote, that is the most human thing I have ever written, and I am fairly sure it is the truest. He set down his pen. Outside the station's viewport, the stars were turning in their slow and patient way, at a scale that had been making everything else feel proportional since long before any of the species watching them had arrived at language. He looked at them for a while. Then he went to bed. Nora Calloway received the conclave's formal request for a debrief statement on the 62nd day. She was at her desk in her quarters, reviewing navigation plans for the next patrol quarter, when the request came through. She read it. She set it aside. She picked up a blank document, and she wrote her statement in the direct, economical way she wrote all official communications, without unnecessary language, without the particular kind of expansion that official statements sometimes invite, because expansion was for things that needed it, and this did not. She wrote, on the 14th day of the 3rd month of this year, the Unsk fleet under my command received confirmed intelligence regarding the fate of the civilian colony vessel, Meridian's Hope, and its 4,218 passengers and crew. I reviewed the intelligence and determined that a response was required. I issued orders. The fleet executed those orders with full competence and complete commitment. The outcome was as described in the attached summary report. She looked at that for a moment. She added one more sentence. She wrote, I would make the same decision again. She sent it. Then she went back to the navigation plans. Voss appeared in her doorway an hour later with 2 cups of tea, which she had not asked for but which he had correctly identified as the thing she needed more than anything else she might have asked for. She took the cup. It was the Chelan preparation she had developed a taste for in the 2nd year of their service together. Specific, a little bitter, the kind of thing that required getting used to, and was worth getting used to. The conclave statement? He said. Sent. He sat down. He did not ask what it said. He had been with her long enough to know that she would tell him what he needed to know. It was accurate, she said. What I sent. I know. I kept it short. Yes. He looked at her. The statement is not the thing that needs to be long. She thought about that. No, she said. The thing that needs to be long is the after. The after was already being long. It was in the quiet of the new patrol assignments and the civilian ship manifests that came through every Tuesday, with their registries of names and ages, and she read every one. Not quickly, not as a scan. She read them the way she had read the Meridian's Hope manifest, with complete attention, with every line given the time it deserved. She read them because every one was a list of people who were going to have their Tuesday mornings. That was the after. The long, steady, specific work of the after, the patrol routes and the coordination calls and the morning briefings, and the cold coffee, and Voss showing up with tea, and Eli Grant learning to keep functioning without stopping, and the civilian ships moving through the corridor safe and unaware of what the corridor had cost. That was what the list in her pocket was for. Not to be carried in grief, to be carried in purpose, to be the weight that made the work specific, that made every patrol route and every manifest and every response to every signal something more than procedure. This is why, the weight said. This is what it is for. She had understood this, she thought, from the first moment, from the cold stillness, at 0347, when the manifests were on the screen, and something old and precise woke up in her chest. She had understood that the weight was permanent, and the work was permanent, and the both of those together were what it meant to be the person who pressed the calm button. She drank her tea. "Voss," she said. "Yes. Do you remember what you said when I told you the order?" "That first night?" He was quiet for a moment. "I said, all of them?" "Yes. I remember." She looked at her cup. Was that shock, or a question? He considered it. "Both," he said. "Mostly the question. Because I needed to be certain you meant it the way I understood it. And when I said yes, then I was certain," he said. "And I adjusted." She nodded. "That's what I mean," she said. "About the after. It's the adjusting. Every day. The choice to be the version that does the work and stays in the room." "Yes," he said. "I think so." "It's not difficult," she said. "Not most days." "No. But it's the thing." "Yes," he said. "It is the thing." They finished their tea. Outside the viewport, the stars were in their usual configuration, steady and enormous, and indifferent to everything below their scale, which was everything. She had been looking at this view from various ships and various viewports for 14 years, and she had never stopped finding it useful. She still found it useful now. The fleet was moving. New routes, new manifests, new rotation of the ships, and the crews, and the steady machinery of protection, that was imperfect, and never sufficient, and absolutely required, all of it turning back toward its ordinary shape, the shape it had before the Meridian's Hope manifest arrived on her screen, and the shape it would have after, a shape that contained the weight of what had been done, and still continued. She put her hand in her pocket one last time. The list was there. The number was there. She had carried it for 62 days, and she would carry it for the rest of her life, in the same pocket, with the same weight, because it deserved to be carried, and she was the person who was going to carry it. She took her hand out. She picked up the navigation plans. The work was there, steady and specific and permanent. She got back to it. Outside, the fleet moved through the dark at safe speed. 14 ships, and the people aboard them, and all the ordinary living that goes on inside a ship that is doing the serious, quiet, necessary work of keeping the corridor safe. The stars moved the way they always moved. Slowly, at the scale that makes everything proportional. Everything was proportional. Everything continued. The list in her pocket did not get lighter. The ships kept moving. That was enough. That had always been enough.